The grocery store smelled faintly of fresh bread and floor cleaner, the kind of scent that reminded people life was moving on, that families were cooking dinner somewhere, laughing, safe and warm. But for Rachel Turner, it smelled like defeat. Her hoodie sleeves were pulled over her trembling hands as she stood in front of the self-checkout, her heart thudding in her chest like a drumbeat she couldn't quiet. The screen flashed a total she couldn't pay, $17.42. It might as well have been $17,000. Behind her, the hum of quiet chatter continued, and she could feel the eyes of strangers brush against her like cold air. In her arms, Eli, her 5-year-old son, clung tightly to her, his small face pressed into her shoulder. He didn't speak much these days. Hunger had a way of making even the brightest children go silent. He wasn't crying now, just watching the display of food items on the conveyor belt, the bread, the peanut butter, the small can of soup. Just enough to get through another day, she'd thought. But enough was a word that had stopped belonging to her months ago. Rachel's throat tightened as she whispered almost to herself, "My son just wants to eat. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small good deeds, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts that still believe in humanity." She tried to keep her voice steady as the cashier repeated the total. Rachel's hands trembled as she dug through her wallet, hoping a miracle had slipped between the folds. A forgotten dollar, a loose coin, anything. There was nothing. Just a photo of Eli smiling back from a sunlit park day long gone, back when she had a husband, a home, and the kind of stability that made a grocery store trip feel ordinary. But that was before the accident, before the hospital bills, before everything fell apart. Her husband, Ben Turner, had been the kind of man who always found a way to make her laugh, even when life seemed impossible. A year ago, he'd kissed her goodbye on a rainy Thursday morning and never came home again. A hit-and-run driver had taken everything from them in seconds. Insurance covered a few months, but grief doesn't pay bills, and jobs don't wait for people who cry too much to focus. Rachel lost hers within 3 months. The rent followed. The car was towed soon after. Now she was walking an hour each way to the nearest grocery store because the bus ticket money went toward bread and milk, luxuries in her new life of survival. The cashier's polite smile faltered when Rachel whispered that she didn't have enough. There was that small pause, the kind that stretches for eternity, when kindness battles judgment. Behind her, someone coughed impatiently. Rachel's face burned. She gathered her few items with shaking hands, meaning to leave quietly, but her son's soft voice broke the silence. "Mommy, I'm hungry." It was such a small sound, barely more than a whisper, but it pierced through the noise of the store. Rachel froze. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. She wanted to explain to her boy that she was trying, that she'd find a way, that maybe tomorrow things would be better, but words wouldn't come. That's when she felt a warm hand on her shoulder. She turned, startled, and found herself looking into the calm, kind eyes of a man in his 40s. His gray-streaked hair and the faint tiredness on his face suggested he'd lived enough life to understand quiet suffering. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and he wasn't smiling, just looking at her with gentle concern. "Let me take care of that," he said softly. Rachel blinked, not understanding. I can't let you." But he'd already stepped forward, sliding his card through the reader without hesitation. The machine beeped, the screen changed, and just like that, the total vanished. "Paid." Rachel's lips trembled. "Please, I don't even know your name." He gave a faint smile. "It's Daniel Brooks, and you don't need to thank me." But she did anyway, her voice breaking. "You don't know what this means." Daniel only nodded, his expression warm but humble. "Actually, I think I do." Rachel didn't know then that Daniel's kindness came from a place of grief too. A year earlier, he'd lost his own wife to cancer, and since then, he'd been living quietly, wandering through his days feeling like he was watching life from the outside. He knew the hollow look of someone who'd run out of options. He'd seen it in the mirror too many mornings. He helped her carry the small bag of groceries outside. It was a simple gesture, but something about the moment felt different, as if life had paused for both of them. Rachel kept apologizing, but Daniel just shook his head. You don't need to be sorry for trying to feed your child. They stood in the cool afternoon air, a silence between them that wasn't uncomfortable. Eli reached into the grocery bag and clutched the loaf of bread like it was gold. Daniel smiled at him. You like peanut butter sandwiches, buddy? Eli nodded shyly. Rachel smiled for the first time in what felt like months. It wasn't a big smile, more like the ghost of one, fragile but real. As they parted, Daniel handed her his card. If you ever need help, with food, a job lead, anything, just call. Rachel wanted to refuse. Pride and fear wrestled in her chest. But deep down, she knew this might be the thread of hope she'd been praying for. She nodded and tucked the card away, whispering a thank you so quiet it barely reached his ears. That night, as she made Eli his sandwich and watched him eat with joy that melted her heart, Rachel cried quietly. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. One stranger's act of kindness had turned her despair into something else, something that looked almost like faith. Days passed. She didn't call Daniel right away. Shame held her back and she didn't want him to think she was taking advantage. But a week later, when the shelter where she'd been staying announced it was closing temporarily, she found herself standing outside a small community center with Daniel's card in her hand. She dialed the number before she could change her mind. He answered on the first ring. Rachel? He remembered her. That alone made her throat tighten. He invited her to come by his office, a local nonprofit that helped families get back on their feet. When she arrived, she was surprised to see him helping unload boxes of donated food with a group of volunteers. He looked up, smiled, and waved her over. From that day on, Daniel helped her find resources, a safe housing program, a job opportunity at a small bakery nearby, and even childcare assistance for Eli. But more than that, he gave her something she hadn't had in a long time, dignity. He never made her feel like a charity case, never pitied her, never looked down on her struggle. Months went by, and Rachel started to rebuild her life. She got the bakery job. Eli began preschool. Slowly, color returned to their world. They even found a small apartment, modest but theirs. One afternoon, she stopped by Daniel's office to thank him. She brought a basket of bread she'd baked herself, still warm, the smell filling the room. I owe you everything, she said, setting it on his desk. He shook his head. You owe me nothing. Just promise you'll help someone else one day when you can. That promise stayed with her. 2 years later, Rachel was working full-time as a baker and volunteering at the same nonprofit Daniel had once run. She'd heard he had moved to another city to help open a new branch. She hadn't seen him in months, but his impact lived on in everything she did. One evening, while closing up the bakery, a young mother came in with a little girl in her arms. Her clothes were worn, her eyes red from crying. Rachel saw the same desperation she'd once carried. The woman whispered, I'm sorry. I just needed to ask if you had anything left over. My daughter hasn't eaten since yesterday. Rachel's heart clenched. She remembered the cold floor of the grocery store, the screen flashing that impossible number, and a stranger's hand on her shoulder. Without a word, she walked to the counter, packed a loaf of bread, pastries, and a bottle of milk into a bag, and handed it to the woman. It's okay, she said softly. Take it. Tears welled up in the mother's eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Rachel smiled gently, repeating the words that had once changed her life. You don't have to. Just promise me you'll help someone else when you can. As the woman left, Rachel turned off the bakery lights and stood for a moment in the quiet. She realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and she owed that not to charity, but to the ripple of one man's compassion. Life had come full circle. A stranger's kindness had not only filled her son's stomach, it had filled their lives with hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to spread the message that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Special request: comment below with the words "kindness lives on" if you believe that one good deed can create a ripple that never ends. Rachel never forgot Daniel Brooks, and though she never saw him again, she often thought that maybe that was how angels worked, quietly, without wings, showing up when the world seemed most cruel. Because sometimes all it takes is one stranger, one moment, one hand on a shoulder, to remind us that humanity still breathes in the hearts of ordinary people.